Hello, welcome. I work for the Early Years Southwest Stronger Practice Hub. My name is Sarah Hercourt and I'm the area Senko. The Early Years Southwest Stronger Practice Hub is one of 18 hubs working with the Department for Education to support education recovery in the early years. And there's a QR code in the top right corner of this slide if you want to take a picture of that with your mobile phone and follow the link later on. You'll find our website. We're working also with the Education Endowment Foundation, and they're working very hard to bring you the most robust evidence base to support your practice. The Early Years Evidence Store gives us a summary of the research behind certain approaches, and their videos are really helpful because they demonstrate what these approaches can look like in our day-to-day practice. So today we're having a look at autism. And the aims of the session today are to understand the strengths and the differences of autism, to use consistent communication and language approaches with autistic children, and to start to think about how we make our curriculum accessible for autistic children. We know that the number of children with special educational needs is increasing, and we know that there are more complex needs coming to our settings. Between 2020 and 2023, the number of children with education, health and care plans increased from around 11,500 to around 15,500. And there's two main aims for this session really. One is to think about consistency and the other is to think about children's sensory needs. So consistency is key, not just within our setting, but it's from home to setting, from our setting to school. And within our team, because without this consistency in our approach, the risk is that the autistic children that we work with, their progress will stall. So it's not just down to the key worker or the Senko to deliver an approach that will tick boxes or solve the problems. It's down to all of us to know each individual child's strengths and differences, their communication and language preferences, and to support them throughout the day with things they find challenging. In terms of their sensory needs, we're going to look at that in more detail in session 2, but I just want to make the point now that this is something that we weave throughout the whole day in terms of a curriculum, if you like. And early years settings have got the advantage here. So we've got more flexibility to prioritise sensory opportunities throughout the day. It's much harder in a school environment because there's less adults and a much tighter timetable. And just a quick memory jogger about transition. Even with the best transition plan in the world, if we don't emphasise the things that the child needs to be consistent, and we don't emphasise the things that the child needs in terms of their sensory processing, then we're setting them up to struggle when they move on to their next room or their next setting. The best bit about getting all this right for our autistic children is that all children benefit. It's not just about the special needs child accessing this with their one-to-one. What I've always found in my work with special needs children is you make a change for one child and it seems to benefit many others, and usually the adults too. So autism is a lifelong developmental disability which affects how people communicate and interact with the world. It's so diverse, so two children with autism can be completely different, and what works for one child doesn't necessarily work for another. But because we work in early years, we are already kind of experts because we really prioritise knowing each unique child. We work as a team. I don't think any of us could cope any other way. We need the team around us, and we work closely with families and other professionals, don't we? So think about that child that you came to this session with in mind today, and I know you can't tell me because this is recorded, but let's imagine we were having a conversation and you were telling me about that child's strengths. What's unique about them? What is it about them that makes you giggle? What is it about them that makes you go, oh wow, that's unusual, that's unique, that's different? Is there anything on this list that sort of jogs the memory, maybe of another child? Because these are some common strengths in autistic traits. So there's like a hypersensitivity and an attention to detail visually. Colour intensity can be an autistic trait. Having acute hearing, so hearing the smallest noises in the house, can be a trait, and a heightened sensitivity to smell as well. There are some strengths in terms of their thinking skills in art, maths and music. Their depths of knowledge in specific areas, and an autistic trait is to really drill down and know stuff. Pattern recognition, and then that obviously leads into an ability to sort of analyze and construct systems in your head. And these are all strengths that you might be familiar with some of the children you're working with. Now let's have a think about some of the things that are a bit different and a bit challenging maybe for us working with these children, and possibly being the first person to notice that they are not developing in a typical fashion. And it's important to point out here that we're not looking at deficit and we're not looking at deviance. It's just a difference. So again, imagine we were having a conversation and you're telling me about the difficulties that this child is experiencing. They might be social difficulties. There might be an issue with the child not reaching age-related expectations around understanding others. There may be some issues with sort of a fixed mindset and that flexibility of being able to take on somebody else's thought or change your mind, may be a challenge. There may be some tricky moments in getting a message across in terms of their communication. Pretend play might be missing from their repertoire of things that they do when they're with you. Their interaction, so the back and forth exchange, breaks down. There may be some sensory needs, so you may notice that at certain times of the day when certain things happen, or when they come into contact with certain things, that there's an outburst. And emotional regulation might be a tricky path to navigate for some of these children. So the impacts of all of this, despite our best intentions and despite the wonderful, outstanding provision and practice that I see when I come out and visit you all, sometimes the impact of having autism is quite powerful on us, isn't it? And on our settings. So just think for a moment about the impact that that child has on you, on your colleagues, on your setting. Because the impact of having a child who's not making progress has really widespread implications, doesn't it? Not just now in our setting right now, but in the future. And if we don't act to change things for that child now, they're not suddenly going to catch up at some point, you know, just in time for the year 1 phonics screening check or year 6 SATs or GCSEs. So our intention needs to be that autistic children learn and develop when they're in our setting, and that's where we need to make some changes to what we implement. Hopefully that's what we're going to do today and in the next session too. So the impact of what we offer in our provision and in our practice is only limited by our understanding, isn't it? So we're all here to grow that. And the children who are showing the signs of autism, or who are just confused half the time, are not accessing all the wonderful things that we've lovingly prepared for them. So let's look at what we can do to change our intentions, adjust our implementation and improve the impact for these children. Okay, so let's have a look at implementation. I've popped a visual up here for you as a bit of a prompt, a conversation starter around how we use visuals. So visuals are part of our ordinarily available provision, aren't they? And visuals need modelling and scaffolding and additional input from you. So do you use visuals like this? Because they can be confusing, can't they? I mean, the best visual really is you. So let's have a look at this visual here. What do you think it means? I don't really know either because there's no context. It's not my bag. Honestly, I don't have a dinosaur bag. I haven't seen it before. It doesn't mean anything to me. Okay, so I've done this myself, stuck a visual on a piece of card thinking that will solve the problem and wondered why the child looks at me completely baffled. So there's a whole range of visuals that we can use. Objects of reference, photographs, pictures, symbols, all are not equal. And we'll explore that in the next slide. For routines and transitions and anything new or unfamiliar, if you can keep your direct and purposeful interactions simple, then we know that in those circumstances, less is more is really the key there. And remember that communication methods involve some form of common understanding really around language. So your interaction back and forth exchanges can be non-verbal as long as there's common understanding between what these different things mean. So while we're working out really the best communication methods for each individual child, we can still interact really well with them because we know them. So in terms of visuals, which is a strategy that we're all familiar with, let's consider the progression of visuals, so where we start and where we're heading really with visuals. So if we think about objects first being the most relevant, the most meaningful for children, and then move on to real life photographs of those objects, and then to symbols, that's the progression in terms of the children's understanding of the meaning behind that thing that we're showing them. And in early years, while we're sort of establishing the child's capacity for language acquisition, for acquiring language for themselves, then visuals aren't there to replace language, they're there to enhance it. But like I said, there are times when less language is more. So to introduce your visuals, if you start with objects of reference, think about the objects that are meaningful to them. So we've got a little one at nursery at the moment who loves the blue slide. So one of my colleagues very cleverly found a little blue slide in the Lego, and that became the object of reference for that child because they knew that when they saw that little Lego blue slide, they were given the opportunity to go and play on their favourite piece of equipment. But stepping back even further, using their coat to indicate that it's time to go outside, using their shoes to indicate that it's time to go for a walk, using a real cup to show that it's drink time or snack time, using their nappy, which I'm sure you will do, to indicate that it's time for a nappy change. And again, going back to that key message about consistency, do the same thing every time, even if you think the child is not looking at you, and even if you don't think that you've got their focus. Children do take in far more than we give them credit for sometimes. So by holding up their coat and using that consistent phrase, coat on, or outside, or in the nursery where I work, it's garden time, then we're giving the child the best opportunity to understand what we're asking them, and we're keeping their anxiety levels down, and we're providing predictability and familiarity, which is what they need. So you can see that our practitioner here in the top left corner has got the objects of reference that are relevant to the child that she's working with, and she's also got some pictures there with it as well. And I think without my glasses on, one of those is actually a symbol, so that might be an indication of the progression of that child, that they're starting to understand that that symbol relates to a meaningful object for them. So we can move on to photos once we know that those objects are a meaningful item for our communication. Then those photos can be used instead. So photograph their coat, photograph their bag, photograph their shoes, their cup, the types of nappies that they have. Again, keep the same phrase, keep that consistent. And once they respond to the photo and the phrase, you can start to extend the language that you're using. So you might say, coat on, outside now, or instead of coat on, you might start adding some verbs to that. Put your coat on. And then when the activity has been completed, you can take the picture off your now and next board, which is shown on the top right, or I do like the fabric one on the top left. I think that's quite nice. Then you move the picture using the word and then sign finish, because that shows them that that's gone and we're moving on to something next. It's starting to introduce them to what a timetable looks like, which their next teacher is really going to thank you for. Plus, if you've got the now and the next side by side, they can see what's coming next, can't they? And with our 0 to 5s, in fact, I've used this with reception children in school, I would just stick with now and next, especially if you're introducing a timetable concept to them. And I just have a paper one in my pocket, and sometimes I just have to draw on it. But I don't worry about laminating. I hate it. It's not eco-friendly. It makes things a bit too bulky to carry around, and the tendency is to put too much on. So just a strip of paper, maybe even folded in half. Now, next. You could even add a bit of chalk to your pocket and draw the now and next outside. And if you've got their objects of reference or the pictures of them handy, you can just pop them on. Never go anywhere without a pot of bubbles. That's just an additional thing. And then when you're introducing the concept of now and next, make it irresistible for the child. So with reception children, when I've been starting to try and build in a bit of formal learning time, it's like it might be a game or a puzzle that I want them to do because I know that's going to build their literacy or their maths, and it would be puzzle first and then it will be the thing that they just find irresistible, the toy, the story, the adult, that whatever it is. And you build that up in tiny little stages, one puzzle piece first and then story. It's keeping it really relevant for the child, and that lends itself really nicely to IEP targets, doesn't it? So they will respond positively, or they will be happy to do one puzzle piece per day before moving on to something that they love, and they'll do that 5 days a week for 2 weeks, and then we move on to doing 2 puzzle pieces, just building it up at a pace that really works for them. Your visual timetables, they should be a part of your ordinarily available provision. They're useful for all children and staff, particularly if you're at the age that I am, where you're forgetting very easily what's coming next. And this doesn't have to be just something you do for your children who've got additional needs. Everyone benefits from a visual timetable. Also, for some autistic children, facial expressions are a difficult concept, and eye contact can be really uncomfortable. And often we make the mistake of thinking, well, the visual helps them, they don't have to look me in the eye, it removes that discomfort. However, if we keep in mind that we're preparing these children for life in a world full of people, it's worth just considering, and I'm playing a bit devil's advocate here, does it do more harm to never give the children a chance to work out how to cope with eye contact? Does it do more harm to not provide them with some explicit teaching about how people use their bodies to communicate? So as an aside, I'm going off on a tangent slightly here, just have a think about how you might use visuals, for example, to teach emotional understanding, bringing that visual close to your face, and if it's got a smiley face on it, this is me when I'm happy, and the same for a sad face, this is me when I'm sad. It's really helping children to link the emotion to it physical, what it's going to look like in an actual human being. And remember, the best visuals that you have are attached to you at all times. So don't forget that your signing, your gestures, your facial expressions are really key here. And like any language, consistency and fluency is key for it to be acquired. So you are already fluent in speech and eye contact and facial expressions and using your hands. If you're anything like me, I use my hands far too much. So be consistent in that. Be consistent across your setting. Let your colleagues know, well, when I do this, this happens. And when I do this, it all goes pear-shaped. So don't do that, do this. And tell their next teacher, pass that information on through transition, because they will thank you. Finally, my last point on this slide is to make sure that you're involving parents in this process, because like I keep saying, that consistency is key. And often when I've had that tricky first conversation with the parents and I'll say, we're not having much success in this area, can you help us with it? And, you know, is there anything that you do at home that really works? Or is there anything you do at home that really doesn't work and we should try and avoid doing as well? And often parents have success in different areas to us, so we can help each other. And when those parents see how we're impacting on their child's development, it builds trust and it builds collaboration. If we started that tricky conversation early on. And I think sometimes we forget in the busyness of early years that we're the first people that the parents are encountering on their child's journey into education. And you know, we really need to get it right, don't we? We want parents to move through education with their child confidently. Another slight tangent, I wouldn't be able to call myself a teacher of the deaf if I didn't mention this. Can you think of a situation where less is more and simplifying language might not be beneficial for young children? I gave you a clue. The clue was in my job title. So if children are deaf, they're already experiencing language deprivation because they're missing a percentage of everything that's said. So the last thing we really want to do for a deaf child is reduce the language even further that they're exposed to. So we have to be quite careful about how we do that, particularly when you've got a mixed diagnosis where you've got ASD, autism spectrum condition, and deafness. It's a really tricky one to navigate. So if that's the case, if you suspect a child is struggling with either glue ear or a permanent deafness, and you're looking at some of these aspects of autism and they're possibly on that pathway, then do get some specialist support around that. So another strategy for the implementation stage of looking at how we support autistic children is observation. And I know you are all really, really good at this. So think about those children again who are puzzling you currently and you're thinking, is it autism? What are they naturally drawn to? What do they enjoy doing? And when you join them in that, what happens? And when your colleague joins them in that, what happens? Often we learn as much from watching our colleagues as we do from attending things like this. So I tend to think about it quite scientifically sometimes as, when I did that, this child did this. But when they did that, the child did a slightly more desirable outcome usually. So what is it that you're doing in your setting that enhances the things that they're naturally drawn to? And what is it that you're doing that's not enhancing? You know, often we can interrupt, can't we? And really sort of ruin the moment. So we're thinking about how we can get involved in the things that they're interested in and then start to enhance it and start to challenge their understanding and move them forwards like we do with any other child. And intensive interaction is a really useful strategy because it tunes your attention into meeting the child in their interests And Alice Thornton, our speech and language therapist, came up with a brilliant analogy for this the other day, which I'm going to steal now. So credit to Alice. I'm not claiming that I made this up, but I thought it was great. So, you know, when you dig a sandcastle in the sand with a child, and then you decide you're going to make a tunnel that goes underneath it, they start digging from one side and you start digging from the other. They don't have any real kind of intention about the direction that they're going in, and they'll be digging off in all sorts of directions. You have to put the work in to changing your approach and your direction and your and how far up or how far down you are, in order to get that connection in the middle where your hands meet. And it's the same with intensive interaction. We have to join the child in what they're doing, and then it takes a few goes to change our approach slightly to then reach a point where we can be accepted into their play and can start to think about moving their understanding and their learning and their development on. It's a beautiful moment when it happens. When you, at the end, there'll be another QR code for you. So that will take you to a feedback form. And when you've filled out the feedback form for us, we will send you some information about intensive interaction. So just look out for that. Joint attention and play. Joint attention is important for communication and interaction, and play and attention skills are interconnected. So when children reach the stage of joint attention, this can really accelerate language development because they begin to relate their experience of the world with the words that you're using. And I often get the stages of attention muddled up, but for this one I've decided that a visual for me, a sort of mental picture, is the thing that's going to help me. And I like to think of it as a triangle that you could draw between you, the child, and an object. And the key to joint attention is that the child really wants your engagement with them, with that object, and that's where the triangulation comes in. And there's something, a brain scientist would explain it far better than me, but there's something really meaningful for that child in that moment that opens up their capacity for the language that you're about to plant in, when they either use their words or make some kind of gesture like pointing or moving their hand or their eye gaze towards an object and then back to you. They're saying, look at this with me, play with this with me. And autistic children are capable of joint attention. It just might be delayed. And it will almost certainly have to be explicitly taught with some modelled examples. For example, attention autism is a really useful intervention strategy for this. It progresses attention levels in a way that's really sensitive and very comfortable for autistic children. Sometimes we expect too much too soon, and we go into the child's play a bit like a hammer trying to crack a nut, and this can then lead to a situation where the child is averse to what we're trying to do and actively avoids it. So what I love about attention autism is it builds the child's attention levels in a really comfortable and safe way for them. And although it can feel a bit odd to deliver it, it is really meaningful for the child, and that the delight that they get from those sessions usually feeds into your enthusiasm. So you feel like it's worth doing. But the first few times you feel like it's a bit odd. But we can send you out some information about attention autism. If you fill out the feedback form at the end, we can do that for you. One warning I would add in is, if you're communicating with parents, or when you communicate, not if, with parents about what you're doing as an intervention with their child, if the child hasn't got a diagnosis of autism, I would call it attention bucket time or attention building time or something like that, because it's not our job to diagnose children. Pretend play is another area that autistic children can find challenging, and there's some really lovely tips here on the right hand side, just above my head, to support your practice around this. Again, like I said before in a previous slide, observation is key. Involve the parents in this so that you can really get an idea of the child's interest and then provide those resources in your setting. Once you've joined a child in their play and this is going well, you can model new pretend play experiences. So if the child has a car, get a matching one or another one, mirror what they're doing with it, and then add something new. Okay, so you're using your intensive interaction skills to then build in attention bucket type skills. The child might not respond the first time. You might not get the eye contact that you're looking for. You might not even think that they can see you. But like I said in a previous slide, don't give up. What they're taking in is far more than what we often give them credit for. They might notice what you're doing, but need to see it a few times to then be able to try it for themselves. So like I said before, if you fill out our feedback form, we'll get some information out to you on all of it. So another implementation for us is to think about how we capture the child's strengths and differences, to communicate that with the other adults involved in their lives, so their parents and other professionals. So a one-page profile goes slightly further than All About Me because it sort of documents the targeted support that the child needs, and it can contribute to referral process, EHCP proposals, reviews. It could be as simple as just listing the child's strengths and the child's challenges, like I've got on the right hand side here, or it could be what people love about me, my hopes and my wishes, things I love, the best ways to support me, like the one on the left here. Or if you're specifically information gathering for an IEP or an EHCP, you could use the 4 areas of special needs as your headings. So what the child's communication looks like, what their understanding looks like, what their emotional development is like, their physical and sensory needs. It's really important information for transitions. So if you've got new staff, new professionals, child is moving between settings of school, a one-page profile is a really useful document. I mean, we're experts, aren't we, in communicating positive information about children. And for our autistic children, we have to become experts in advocating for their needs. It's still a positive communication, but it can feel a bit tricky the first few times you try it. But I've always felt that it's better to have that difficult conversation than risk a child missing out on something that could help them. You can involve the child in this, and in my QTOD work, we take photos of what the child has told us in answer to these questions in the middle, and I'm sure that it wouldn't take a huge leap to transfer that to early years. I mean, the older children I work with, they love to be in charge of the whole process. They take the camera and they're answering these 5 questions with more and more independence each time. We have a review. We ask them, what helps me or helps you? Who helps you? What do your friends love about you? What do you need help with? What are you good at? And there you go, snap, 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 snap. And we put all that together in a nice collage, and that's a really lovely visual piece of information for everybody involved with that child. So this is an amazing video that you can find on YouTube. I told you there was going to be a lot of QR codes in this presentation, didn't I? So here's another one. And if you follow this link, you will find this fantastic video that helps us all to appreciate the diversity that's out there in the world, and how we are all different, and that's okay. So I'd strongly encourage you, it's only 5.5 minutes of your time. Later on, go and have a little look at that, and please share widely with everybody. I really wanted to share this slide with you that I discovered on the Education Endowment Foundation website. It's not from the Early Years Evidence Store, but it is from the Education Endowment Foundation. So there's a huge amount of work that's gone in to present this to you as an evidence-based approach. And it's there 5 a day for children who have special educational needs and disabilities. They don't currently have an early years one. And some of the language that's used in this one is to me, it's a bit schooly. So I've tweaked it slightly to make it more relevant to us. And it kind of summarises what we've talked about today, which is why I've just sort of slipped it in there. So if nothing else, think about those 5 things you're going to try and do every day for your children with SEND. Where they've talked about explicit instruction as point 1, we do that, but we do that in a slightly more informal way, don't we? So I've changed that to modelling, where we explicitly teach new skills like joint attention, pretend play, but we might do it in group time, or we might do it in continuous provision, or we might do it in a small group or a one-to-one. We've got more flexibility in the early years. It's so important to remember to do it across all areas of our provision, so not just in group time and not just in continuous provision, because the evidence suggests that teaching something explicitly and then supporting them in different contexts to practice those skills is the most effective approach. So point 2 contains 2 very big words. Anything to do with cognition means your understanding, how your brain is working. So I've changed that, because they're big old words, to thinking out loud. So if we lend children our thinking skills, especially using the vocabulary think, know, and remember, if we do that around the new skills that we're focusing on, so if, for example, the IEP target is for the child to show you that they are delighted when you do your intensive interaction with them, you can say to the child, I think you like the car makes you smile. Or you could say, I know you can make the car go up and down. Or you could say, I remember that you like to let go of the car at the top. So you're building in those 3 really key pieces of vocabulary that a lot of their later academic success is going to hinge on. Point 3, they talk about scaffolding. I'm sure this is a word that you've all heard, and I've changed that to the sensitive and skillful support that I see whenever I visit early years settings, which is where we adjust what we're doing in the moment for each individual child and their stages of development and their needs. We really know our children, and Ofsted want to see that when they come in. So they want to find out why we're doing this activity, why we're doing it with this child, and what's next for them. And that is where our sensitive and skillful support really answers those questions for Ofsted before we've even opened our mouths. So if we're assessing the child's development so far and we're planning for progress, and we've got our IEP targets really, really smart, and we're reviewing how it's going and refining that and rejigging it and reevaluating, then we can be really confident that we're scaffolding children, and Ofsted can see that everywhere in our provision, and we are sensitively and skillfully supporting those children to make progress. So point 4, again, I felt that this was very school focused when it talks about flexible grouping. By its very nature in our earlier provisions, we are flexible on our grouping, aren't we? So I changed that to social interaction, which is really the phase that children get to when they get to about 18 months and they start making friends, and we start realising that they need to go to these social play groups and preschools to really build on that. And that's hugely, massively underpinned by research, which tells us that learning comes from a range of social opportunities, not just from an adult leading at the front of the room. So I changed that one to social interaction to reflect the fact that in early years, we know how important it is to meet the children in their choice of play, because we know that's more meaningful for them. And this is a really tricky area for our autistic children. But we know that there's a well-being aspect to positive social interaction, and we know that inclusion is taught. It doesn't often just happen. So have a think about how you're teaching other children in that lovely social environment to be inclusive towards the children who are developing differently. And the evidence suggests, again, that we need to explicitly teach those inclusion skills and then provide opportunities for children to practice. And finally, using technology. There's a tendency to read this and think, oh, let's sit them all in front of screens. But I'm always really interested in, well, what comes before that? What underpins that? Screens can be really successful for children's learning, but only if they're used in the right way. So I sort of picked that one apart and looked at the cause and effect of a child's interaction with a screen, and or with technology. They know that if I press that button, or I see that happen, or I do this, or I say this, or I sign this to someone, then this will happen. And it's not just about having a device, because of course they are helpful too, but the cause and effect of interaction with other people is what we can really support autistic children with in early years settings. So an example is, I taught an autistic child who was struggling to access our phonics provision. So we set him up alongside the phonics provision and all the inclusion strategies, and the modelling and the thinking out loud and the sensitive and skillful support. We set him up with some software to support him with phonics training in his brain, and it was on a screen, and his progress was rapid. And that's because the interaction with a screen was more manageable for him than the social interaction element of everything else we were doing. But remember the key messages that I mentioned at the start about being consistent and understanding the sensory needs of autism, and making sure that we're not excluding them from all the opportunities that your typically developing children will have. And remember, the best visual is you. So have a think about your setting and your provision and your practice, and how you're providing those 5 a day for all the children who have either undiagnosed or diagnosed special educational needs and disabilities. Okay, that's the end of our autism session. Next time we'll be talking about the sensory curriculum, and I've got lots and lots of ideas for you there. That was a lot of information for you today, so I'm sorry it was such a lot to kind of wade through, but I really hope that there's one thing that you might take away and share with a parent of a child at your setting. There may be 2 things that you might share with your colleagues to sort of, did you know? I love going back to my settings. Did you know? And 3 things that maybe you will just change or do more of because you now know that it's a really good evidence-based approach. Please leave us some feedback. We're trying to support you in every which way we can, so we're putting training on all hours of the day. We're recording these sessions so you can access them when it's convenient for you, but we'd love to know how that's going, how that's landing for you. So please, if there's only one QR code that you follow today, and I hope it hasn't been death by QR codes, please follow this one and leave us some feedback, and then we will send you out the intensive interaction and attention autism information as promised. So thank you very much for coming along, and I hope to see you in person very soon. Bye.